trunk diseases are very important for us as well and are becoming more and more of an issue in the grape and wine industry as our industry ages. In the US, this is becoming more of a focus for us because our vines are starting to succumb to trunk diseases more and more. So these are fungal pathogens that just they basically all do the same thing. They just occlude vascular flow. They get up into the xylem and they choke the vine out, and they cause water stress that can't be ameliorated through irrigation. They generally, most of the ones that we think about in the vine enter through pruning wounds. And so when you go out and prune the vine, there'll be, if you prune an infected vine, there'll be fungal spores in those pruning wounds. The rain will come, drop onto those fungal spores, and then those spores are designed such that like the physiology of the spore will, like, when the rain hits it, the spore will then splash over to an adjacent vine. And then when it does that, if it splashes into a wound, then that wound can become infected by the fungus, and then the fungus can move down the vascular tissue. So this is why when we prune, we try not to prune in the rain, which is impossible in Oregon because it rains almost every day in the winter. Not a heavy rain. The rain in Oregon, by the way, is not like the rain on the East Coast, which can be like a deluge all at once. The rain in Oregon is like a constant drizzle. We don't use umbrellas in Oregon. We always say we can always spot the Californians in Portland because they're the ones walking around with umbrellas. Everybody else, like, you just put on your rain jacket, you scrunch your face up like this, and then you just walk. That's the Oregon way. But that little amount of rain, that constant kind of drizzle that happens through from, basically mid to late October until April, is a problem for trunk disease spread. In California, of course, you can avoid pruning in the rain because they don't get rain, so easy enough. But then we'll apply also. We'll try to avoid that, and then also apply things like we'll seal the wounds off with kind of like latex things, or it'll be like latex paint that contains like also like boric acid. That's antifungal. And then also it might include a fungicide. Yeah. So here's some important ones. This one's called Esca. You can see it. So this should all look white in here, with just like that. You can see the little pit in the middle, and that should be brown. But everything around here should be white. So this all is just fungus that's occluded this vascular tissue. So not great. This is what Esca looks like on the vine itself. Like, you can see the vine just collapsed. It's experiencing like extreme water stress, and try to put water on it, it doesn't go away. This is also sometimes called measles in grapes because you get this symptom that looks like those like spots on the fruit itself, which are like measles. And then you get what we also call like tiger striping, which is this like intervenal necrosis, which looks pretty cool, right? Looks pretty amazing. Yeah. Then this here is Utypa, also called Utypa dieback. The reason it's called dieback is because we often will find it on cordons. So we tend to get more trunk disease on cordon spur pruned vines. It's simply a function of more pruning wounds. So when you cordon spur prune, you're making like twice the number of pruning wounds because you have all those spurs, and then that just opens the vine up for more possibilities of infection. And it's called dieback because what happens is oftentimes, like, so say that the vine next door had Utypa, and then you pruned it, and then the rain came, dropped onto a Utypa infected spur, and then that fungus just will splash over. It's not going to splash that far, but it'll splash somewhere around the tip of the adjacent cordon, and then now Utypa starts to move down the grapevine. So you start to see like these shoots here are heavily impacted by the Utypa fungus, and then these shoots back here seem fine. So what you're seeing is back here, this vascular tissue is impacted. The vascular tissue that's over here is probably okay, which is why with trunk diseases like these, we can prune this stuff out. So if we see that, we can just cut like right here, retrain a cordon, and then we'll be okay. Um, I should mention that not all trunk diseases do this. Not all trunk diseases are coming in from the top. That's actually the easiest. Those are the easiest ones for us to deal with because we can, if they're coming in from the top, then we can do pruning strategies to cut them out. But some do come up from the bottom. So there's one called Armalleria, which isn't discussed all that often, but I've seen it quite a lot actually in the last few years. And there's nothing you can really do. There are some things to kind of try to ameliorate it, but it's not super effective, not super efficient. So, yeah. And also, sometimes too, these trunk diseases are coming from the nursery. So they're not even being spread in the vineyard, it's just right from the nursery. And then eventually, over time, the trunk disease, the fungal disease, it just builds up in the vascular tissue. And then you just start to see vines collapse to it. And you can't prune it out at all because it's just been in there the entire time. Yeah. So preventing trunk diseases, so we can do things like I said, applying sealants and fungicides. Oftentimes we'll mix the sealant and fungicide together and then just go out and like paint it on the vine. Sometimes in the larger vineyards, they'll just go out and spray fungicides and not do any of the sealants. They'll spray the fungicides. We try not to prune in the rain. Again, like I said, this is easier said than done in Oregon, but in California, 100% they can avoid pruning in rain. We can double prune, which is like double pruning is so say you've got like my arm is a shoot, okay, and so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buds. I could prune down to like a 4-bud spur. I could do that in December, say. And then what might happen is like the fungus will jump and then hit the spur, infect that spur. And then like in April or March, when the sap is flowing and all that stuff, and the vine is less susceptible to trunk disease the later in the season, I'll just go and cut it down to 2 bud spurs. Okay, so I'll cut the remainder out. So I'm pruning twice. So it's infecting up top, and then I'm cutting out what was infected, and then it just breaks bud, and sap flow is moving, and my vine is way less susceptible to trunk disease. Okay, we try to avoid big cuts, which makes intuitive sense. Bigger the cut, the more surface area you have open to get infected. And then we can also mulch or burn our prunings. So in an area like Burgundy in France, they will often burn prunings, and you'll see this happen all over France. But know that all over Europe, vineyard holdings are generally very small, especially in France because of some sort of Napoleonic inheritance laws. Those vineyards have been broken up into really small parcels, and I mean really small. People own like 1 or 2 rows at a time, and that's not uncommon. Now, of course, in the United States, we operate on much larger scales, so we can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. But what we do is mulch our prunings. And so we go through with what's called a flail mower, put all of our prunings in the center of a row, and then we cut them up into 1-inch pieces that degrade quickly. But yeah, so the fungal diseases can exist in those prunings. We try to get rid of those prunings as best we can. This is what it looks like when you do the sealants. This one in particular is quite nice. It smells like cinnamon when you have it on your hands. I probably shouldn't be putting any kind of agrochemical on my hands, but this is it's like Big Red. It's very nice. Armalleria, by the way, is the single largest living organism on the planet. And yes, of course, it's in the great state of Oregon, because that's where all the greatest things are. It's actually in what's called the Malheur National Wildlife Preserve, which you may be familiar with if you follow the news at all, with like the Bundy family and their kind of followers when they went and did an armed takeover of that wildlife preserve. That's where it is. But it is, so Armalleria it's a fungus that exists on oak roots, but also like there's other plants that it can live on as well. So in Oregon, a lot of times when we're planting vineyards, we will plant in old kind of forested land, and some of those, you have oaks in there, and other host plants for Armalleria, so that fungus can live on those roots, and then take over grapevines when we plant them, take over the vascular tissue and kill vines. Um, we can fumigate the soil with things like methyl bromide, but you can't really do that anymore in modern society and developed nations. It's hugely destructive to the environment, so it's not, in most developed nations, it's not even really legal to do that. This is what it can look like. So this is Armalleria here, which creates this like cool mycelial mat underneath the bark, and you can like lift it up, like you can lift off whole big chunks of the mycelium with just like a knife, and then it can do things like this, and cause kind of these disease centers in vineyards that really you can't even replant in here. You can, but it's just going to keep, the vines are just going to keep succumbing to the fungal disease.